and welcome to our podcast, where we help you improve your English skills in fun and interesting ways. I'm Sophia.
And I'm James. We're so happy to have you here today. If you want to learn English through podcasts, you're in the right place. Podcasts are a fantastic tool for language learning.
That's right, James. They're not just fun to listen to, but also a great way to practice your listening skills, learn new words, and even improve your pronunciation.
Exactly. Today, we'll talk about how you can use podcasts to learn English and give you tips to make the most of them. Let's start by understanding what a podcast is.
A podcast is like a radio show, but you can listen to it anytime, anywhere. It's a recording of people talking about different topics. Some podcasts are about news, some about stories, and others teach skills like this one.
And the best part, you can pause, rewind, or listen again if you don't understand something. That makes podcasts perfect for learning a language.
That's so true. Now, let's talk about some keywords and phrases related to podcasts. James, what's a word people should know when they're starting?
I'd say episode. A podcast usually has many episodes. Each episode is like a chapter in a book. You can choose which episode you want to listen to based on the topic.
Good one, James. Another useful word is subscribe. When you subscribe to a podcast, it means you follow it. This way, you get notified when a new episode comes out.
Yes, and here's another phrase, streaming or download. You can stream a podcast, which means you listen to it online, or you can download it and listen later without the internet.
Great explanations. Now, James, let's talk about why podcasts are so good for learning English.
Sure. One big reason is that they help you with listening. Listening to native speakers can improve your understanding of how English sounds in real life.
That's a great point. Podcasts can also teach you new vocabulary. When you hear a word you don't know, you can write it down and look it up later.
And don't forget about pronunciation. By listening carefully, you can learn how words are spoken and even copy the way native speakers talk.
Yes, plus, you can choose podcasts that match your level. For beginners, look for podcasts with slow and clear speech. If you're intermediate, try something a bit faster.
That's a great tip, Sophia. And remember, it's okay if you don't understand everything. Focus on the main ideas. Over time, your listening will get better.
Absolutely. Another idea is to repeat parts of the podcast. If you hear a sentence you like, pause and say it out loud. It's good practice.
Yes, and you can even use podcasts to learn phrases. For example, if the host says, "That's a good question," you can learn how to use that phrase in your conversations.
That's a great example, James. Learning phrases is important because they help you sound natural when speaking English.
Right? And one more thing, don't forget to enjoy the process. Learning English should be fun, and podcasts can make it an enjoyable part of your day.
Totally agree. All you need is your phone or computer, headphones, and a little time each day. It's easy to fit into your routine.
That's true. You can listen while walking, cooking, or even relaxing. It's a simple way to improve your English without feeling like you're studying.
And on that note, let's pause here. We've covered a lot about why podcasts are useful and how to get started. There's so much more to talk about, so stay with us.
Yes, we're just getting started. Keep listening, and we'll explore even more ways to use podcasts for learning English.
So let's keep going. In this part, we're going to dive deeper into how to use podcasts for learning English and how to make it a regular habit. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get started.
Yes, and I think one of the most important things to talk about is choosing the right podcast. With so many options, it can be overwhelming. Sophia, how do you recommend picking a podcast?
That's a great question, James. First, think about your interests. Do you like stories, learning about history, or maybe something funny? When you choose a topic you enjoy, learning becomes easier and more fun.
Absolutely. If you're excited about the topic, you'll want to listen more often. Another tip is to find podcasts made for English learners. These podcasts usually speak more slowly and use simpler words, which is perfect for beginners and intermediates.
Yes, and don't forget to check the length of the episodes. Some podcasts have episodes that are 5 or 10 minutes long, while others are an hour or more. If you're just starting, shorter episodes might be better so you don't feel overwhelmed.
Great point, Sophia. Once you've chosen a podcast, what's the next step?
The next step is creating a routine. For example, decide when and where you'll listen. Maybe you listen in the morning, while having breakfast, or in the evening before bed. Making it a habit is really important.
Yes, and routines help you stay consistent. It's better to listen for 10 minutes every day than to listen for an hour once a week. Small, regular practice makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And while listening, keep a notebook with you. When you hear a new word or phrase, write it down. Later, you can check its meaning and practice using it.
That's a great tip. And don't just write the word. Write an example sentence you heard in the podcast. For instance, if the word is routine, you might write, "Listening to podcasts is part of my daily routine."
Perfect example, James. Writing down examples helps you remember words better. Another idea is to use flashcards. You can write the word on one side and the meaning or sentence on the other.
Flashcards are excellent for review, and if you don't want to use paper, there are apps you can download to make digital flashcards.
That's so convenient. Another way to use podcasts is to listen actively. Instead of just playing the episode, focus on the words and phrases. Try to understand the meaning without looking at a dictionary right away.
Yes, that's called context. Often, you can guess what a word means by listening to the sentences around it. For example, if someone says, "I like to listen to podcasts while jogging," you might guess that jogging means running slowly.
That's a great example. And after you listen, take some time to review. Think about what you learned. Maybe you can write a short summary of the episode in your own words.
Writing a summary is a fantastic way to practice your writing and remember what you heard. And if you have a language partner or teacher, you can share your summary with them for feedback.
That's a wonderful idea, Jens. Speaking of language partners, you can also use podcasts for speaking practice. For example, after listening to an episode, try to talk about it. You can say, "I listened to a podcast about learning English. It talked about routines and new vocabulary."
Yes, even if you don't have a partner, you can talk to yourself. It might feel funny at first, but it's a great way to practice forming sentences in English.
That's so true. Another way to practice is to repeat what you hear in the podcast. If the host says, "Welcome to today's episode," pause the podcast and say it yourself. This helps with pronunciation and fluency.
And don't worry if you don't sound perfect. The goal is to improve little by little. Over time, you'll notice that your speaking gets better.
Exactly. And here's another tip. Listen to the same episode more than once. The first time, just try to understand the main idea. The second time, focus on the details, like new words or phrases.
That's such a helpful strategy, Sophia. Each time you listen, you'll pick up something new. And because you already know the main idea, it gets easier.
Definitely. One more thing, don't be afraid to challenge yourself. If a podcast feels too easy, try something a little harder. You might not understand everything, but that's okay. It's part of learning.
Yes, and as you listen to harder podcasts, you'll start to recognize more words and phrases. It's a great way to see your progress.
Exactly. Learning English with podcasts is all about taking small steps and enjoying the process. So let's pause here for now. We've talked about choosing podcasts, creating a routine, and making the most of your listening time.
Yes, there's so much more to explore, and we're excited to keep going. Let's continue to help you improve your English step by step.
Let's continue. So far, we've talked about how to choose the right podcast, create a routine, and use podcasts for improving your listening, vocabulary, and speaking skills. Now, let's dive deeper into specific techniques and strategies that can take your learning to the next level.
Yes, Sophia, and I think one of the best strategies is to use podcasts with transcripts. Many podcasts, especially those for English learners, provide a transcript or written version of everything the hosts say.
That's such a great point, James. Transcripts are incredibly helpful. For example, if you're listening to an episode and don't understand a word, you can check the transcript to see how it's spelled.
Exactly. And once you know the spelling, you can look it up in a dictionary to learn its meaning. You can also practice pronouncing the word correctly by listening to how the hosts say it.
Yes, and you can even read along with the transcript while listening. This helps you connect the spoken and written forms of words, which is great for building your overall language skills.
Absolutely. Another tip is to turn listening into a game. For example, before you listen, look at the transcript and choose 3 new words to focus on. As you listen, try to hear those words and pay attention to how they're used.
That's such a fun idea, James. Another game could be to predict what will happen next in the podcast. If the episode is a story, pause and think, what do I think will happen next? This makes listening more interactive.
Yes, and it's also a great way to practice thinking in English. Speaking of interactive, let's talk about shadowing. Sophia, do you want to explain what shadowing is?
Of course, shadowing is when you listen to a podcast and repeat what the speaker says right after them, like an echo. It's a powerful way to improve your pronunciation and speaking rhythm.
That's right. For example, if the host says, "Welcome to the show," you immediately say, "Welcome to the show." Try to match their tone and speed as closely as possible.
Exactly. It might be tricky at first, but don't give up. Start with short sentences and slower podcasts, then work your way up to longer and faster ones.
And here's a bonus tip. Record yourself while shadowing. Then, listen to the recording and compare it to the podcast. This helps you notice areas where you can improve.
That's such a good idea, James. Recording yourself can feel strange at first, but it's really helpful for tracking your progress.
Definitely. Now, let's talk about another technique: creating your own flashcards from podcast episodes. We mentioned writing down new words earlier, but you can take it further by making digital flashcards with apps.
Yes, some apps even let you add audio to the flashcards. You can record yourself saying the word or phrase, then play it back later. This combines listening and speaking practice.
That's a great point. And don't forget to review your flashcards regularly. Consistent review helps move new words from your short-term memory to your long-term memory.
Exactly. Another thing to try is focusing on expressions or idioms you hear in podcasts. For example, if the host says, "It's raining cats and dogs," write it down. Look up its meaning and try to use it in your own sentences.
Idioms are so fun to learn because they make your English sound more natural, and podcasts are full of them. You'll also hear common phrases like "to be honest" or "let's get started."
That's true, James. And when you hear these phrases often, you'll start to recognize them automatically. Soon, you'll feel confident using them in your conversations.
Exactly. And let's not forget about learning grammar through podcasts. You don't need to study grammar rules all the time. Just listening to how sentences are formed can teach you a lot.
That's so true. For example, if you hear, "I've been learning English for 2 years," you can notice the grammar pattern. "I have been verbing." It's a natural way to learn.
Yes, and when you hear grammar in context, it's easier to understand and remember. Plus, it feels less like studying and more like real-life learning.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about another idea: using podcasts to improve your listening for specific accents. For example, if you want to understand British English better, listen to podcasts with British hosts.
That's a great point. There are so many different accents in English, British, American, Australian, and more. Listening to various accents helps you become a more flexible and confident listener.
Absolutely. And don't forget that podcasts are also a great way to learn about culture. Many podcasts talk about food, holidays, and traditions. This helps you understand not just the language, but also the people who speak it.
Yes. For example, if you listen to a podcast about Thanksgiving, you'll learn new words like turkey, feast, and gratitude, as well as the cultural meaning of the holiday.
That's such a good example, James. Learning culture and language together makes your learning experience richer and more enjoyable.
I couldn't agree more. Let's pause here for now. We've covered so many creative ways to use podcasts for learning English transcripts, shadowing idioms, accents, and even culture.
Yes, there's so much you can do with podcasts. Keep practicing these techniques, and you'll see progress in no time.
All right, let's continue. We've shared so many tips and strategies so far, and now it's time to bring everything together. In this part, we'll talk about how to stay motivated, measure your progress, and keep improving your English with podcasts.
That's right, James. Staying motivated is one of the most important parts of learning English. It's easy to feel excited at the beginning, but over time, you might feel stuck or even frustrated. Let's talk about ways to stay inspired.
A great way to stay motivated is to set small, achievable goals. For example, instead of saying, "I want to be fluent in English," try something like, "I want to understand 80% of this podcast episode," or "I want to learn 5 new words this week."
That's such a good idea, James. Small goals help you see progress, which keeps you motivated. And every time you achieve a goal, reward yourself. Maybe treat yourself to your favorite snack or take a break to watch a movie.
Yes, rewards are a great motivator. Another idea is to track your progress. For example, keep a journal where you write down what you've learned from each podcast. Over time, you'll be amazed at how much you've improved.
Absolutely, and don't forget to celebrate milestones. For example, if you've been listening to podcasts every day for a month, that's a big accomplishment. Take a moment to feel proud of yourself.
That's so important, Sophia. Now, let's talk about variety. Sometimes people lose motivation because they feel bored. If that happens, try changing the type of podcast you listen to.
Great point, James. If you usually listen to news podcasts, switch to a storytelling podcast or one about your hobbies. Variety keeps things fresh and interesting.
Exactly. And speaking of hobbies, why not combine learning English with something you love? For example, if you like cooking, listen to podcasts about recipes. If you're into sports, find podcasts about your favorite teams.
That's such a good idea. When you connect language learning with your passions, it doesn't feel like work, it feels fun.
Yes, and here's another tip. Share your progress with friends or family. Tell them about the new words or phrases you've learned. You can even recommend podcasts to them and discuss what you've heard.
That's a great idea, James. Sharing your learning journey not only helps you remember what you've learned, but also keeps you accountable.
Exactly. And if you're part of a study group or language class, suggest using podcasts as a learning tool. You can listen to an episode together and then discuss it.
Yes, podcasts can be a wonderful group activity. And discussing what you've heard helps you practice speaking and listening at the same time.
Now, let's talk about measuring progress. Sometimes learners feel like they're not improving, even though they are. What are some ways to see progress, Sophia?
One way is to re-listen to an old podcast episode. Choose one that you found difficult when you first started. Listen to it again after a few weeks or months, and you'll probably notice that it feels easier now.
That's such a great idea. Another way is to test yourself. For example, write down 10 new words you've learned from a podcast and try to use them in sentences.
Yes, and you can also record yourself speaking about a topic you heard in a podcast. Then compare your recording to an older one. You'll hear how much your speaking has improved.
That's such a good tip, Sophia. And remember, progress doesn't have to be big to be meaningful. Even understanding one more word than before is a step forward.
Absolutely. Language learning is a journey, not a race. Be patient with yourself and celebrate every little success.
Exactly. And let's not forget to talk about confidence. Sometimes people feel shy or afraid to make mistakes. Sophia, what would you say to those learners?
I'd say it's completely normal to feel that way. But remember, making mistakes is part of learning. Every mistake is an opportunity to improve.
That's so true, and podcasts can actually help build your confidence. The more you listen, the more familiar you become with English, and the more confident you'll feel using it.
Yes, and don't compare yourself to others. Everyone learns at their own pace. Focus on your own progress and enjoy the process.
That's great advice, Sophia. Before we wrap up, let's quickly review everything we've talked about.
Good idea. So, we started by discussing why podcasts are a great tool for learning English. They help with listening, vocabulary, pronunciation, and even grammar.
Then we talked about choosing the right podcast, creating a routine, and using strategies like shadowing, transcripts, and flashcards to make the most of your listening time.
We also shared ideas for staying motivated, measuring progress, and combining language learning with your hobbies.
And remember, the most important thing is to enjoy the journey. Learning English with podcasts can be fun, inspiring, and effective if you stick with it.
That's right. So keep listening, keep practicing, and don't give up. You've got this. At fault text.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share it with your family and friends.
Yes, sharing is caring. We're so glad you're here, and we can't wait to see you again in the next episode.